Welcome to the Grief Ladies, the practical guide to what comes next. I'm Kelly Daugherty.
And I'm Karyn Arnold, and we are two grief professionals with over 50 years of combined experience. We're here to validate, educate, and give you tangible tools you can actually use.
Each episode motivates you to take action and reminds you it's okay to want to feel better. This is the Grief Ladies, a guide to what comes next.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Karyn Arnold, and I'm here with Kelly Daugherty. So we have been kind of going through the various steps of the G.R.I.E.F platform that we are introducing here as, a way to be handling some different aspects of the grief process, which could be very complicated, very confusing. And we are trying to, give some tools and suggestions. In our early days here, we're really actually just sort of introducing things, giving overviews, and wanting, I think, as we said, Kelly, to kind of validate this experience for people. So last week we were at E, which stands for evolving. And that's a really important part of this process. People struggle with their self-esteem, complex emotions like anger, guilt, regret, resentment, things like that. And we're trying to bring that conversation in since that's such a big part of what people are going through. Now we're moving to this next piece of it, which is F, which stands for finding. This is a big one. I think you and I have kind of talked about this a little bit, like the all-encompassing things that don't fit into the other categories, because there is a lot of that soul searching that is happening. I think a lot of people, after they've had a significant loss, feel like, okay, my life was one way, and then in an instant, it all looks very different. And a lot of people describe it as starting over. So that idea of finding, searching, trying to make some sense and meaning of things, we've talked about it, on the I think social level to some degree, but we're also going to be talking a little bit about that spiritual and kind of answering some of the big questions as well. So that's some of what we're going to be talking about here today. As always, our program is about progress. We are certainly here, and at different times we'll be sharing stories, we'll be sharing experiences, but we're always looking for that to do. We call it grief in action for a reason. We are looking for those tangible tools. We are looking, people say to me all the time, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So that's what we're here to do, is to kind of help guide some of that. So Kelly, you want to start us off and tell us a little bit more about finding and what that means in this context?
Yeah, and so I absolutely love this topic, and I agree. There's so many different layers that we can be talking about with this. But what I hear so much is I'm not the same person I was, right?
Yeah.
Before the loss. It's changed me. And so it really comes down to this identity piece. Who am I now? And where do I want to go from here? Right. And I don't believe as people we're always the same, right? I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. And hopefully I'm not going to be the same person in the next 5 years, right? We're constantly evolving and growing and changing. And grief does definitely impact that, right? It changes sometimes our view of the world, right? View of other people. It also identity, right? Who am I now, right? You may have been a spouse, and now that person has died, and who am I now? Who am I without them? Who does these tasks for me? Now I have to do these things. Am I capable of doing these things? And so it's kind of about rediscovering who you are and
Yeah.
where do you want to go from here. And it really comes after the evolving, because I think it helps you be able to recognize where your power lies and who are you now. And you do have a bit. I mean, some people don't believe that, but you do have a bit of like, where do I want to go from here? And making some goals and taking some steps to get to that place. I always believe that, like, I love when they talk about one of the theories in grief, in the grief world, is finding meaning. And it comes down to three things: benefit of finding, sense making, and identity reconstruction. Who am I now? And where am I going from here? Right. And also, how do I stay connected to my loved one? How do I keep that grief? Right. That grief is always going to be with us. But how do we grow bigger than our grief? And I love that concept, right? Grief, that doesn't change in size, but we can grow bigger than it. The picture of the mason jars, and you see the ball of grief, right? The mason jars get larger. The grief doesn't change its size, right? And we can grow bigger than it. And I think, Karyn, we are here because of our own experiences, and we have grown bigger than our grief. It doesn't mean that our grief still isn't here, but we have learned ways to integrate our grief into our life. And I really do think that's where a lot of finding comes down to. And also, like you mentioned, like, I don't know who I am anymore. Okay, well, who do you want to be?
Yeah.
What would that look like? And also being able to, when we talk about sometimes that benefit finding, a lot of my clients will, it's interesting what they talk about, but they talk a lot about, like, well, I know grief now. So I know how to be there for somebody. Oh, my husband died and now my coworker's husband died. And now I'm able to be there for her in such a different way than I would have been in the past because I know grief. Right. So sometimes that benefit finding is having that better understanding and being able to support people differently.
Yeah.
But I also think that benefit finding sometimes can be, I have this one widow and she celebrates when she learns something new. When she gets on YouTube and has to learn how to fix something and she does it, she celebrates that, right? And so she's so proud of herself to be able to grow like that and become more independent. And obviously for me, like, I wouldn't be talking to any of you if my mom hadn't died when I was 14. And I found who I am because of that grief experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've learned so much about myself because of that. And finding meaning for me is huge, right? I find meaning in my grief every single day by the work that I do.
Yeah. I think it's
Um,
interesting. Well, one thing is that, this who am I now? I had someone say to me one time is that they've learned that that question can be answered a different way every day. Which is something really important. I think we feel like we were settled. This is who I was. I finally got it all figured out, and now it's all been changed. And then we get really frustrated because grief is requiring us to be constantly evolving,
mhm,
shifting, changing, adjusting. And we sort of learned that's probably what we've been doing all along. It's just we had people around us that we had our links to identity that would help us make a little bit more secure, I guess, feeling secure in some of those definitions. But who we are in our early grief versus a little bit further
mhm,
along versus down the road, we're going to be answering that differently. But I do find that this is a question that comes more often after some of the early and acute grief has, quieted a bit. In the beginning, we may
yeah.
not even have the capacity to be answering this. But some of what you were saying, I had a group one time and everybody kind of went around and we were talking about the ways grief has changed you. And it was a lot of what you expect. People were like, I'm exhausted all the time. I can't focus anymore. I don't feel as engaged with my family. And it was a lot of like kind of negative things in the beginning. And then we got to this one woman and she said, I am so much more compassionate now. I just feel so open and connected to the world. And it's just so interesting how that works because we were going kind of in a circle. And as soon as we got to that kind of something positive, other people started to kind of, share those things too. And it was like, yeah, it's these changes coming in so many different ways. I've had people say, "I wish they could see me now. I wish, this version
Mhm,
of myself existed before. I'm more patient, I'm more understanding. My husband would have loved this person,
mhm.
really liked how kind I can be and understanding with stuff." So it's interesting, the changes that you see at different times.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. In the early days, right? Probably even the first 6, 8 months even, some of this stuff you're gonna be like, there's no benefits. There
Right.
is like, I'm not gonna be this better person or whatever. Like, this sucks. This is awful. I'm never gonna be okay.
Right.
And that's okay if that's what you feel right now. You know, Going back to our grounding, right? That mindfulness, being in the present moment right now may suck. And I get that. And we totally understand that. But who we can't say what 3 months or 6 months we're gonna feel like.
Yeah.
I had a woman, "I'm never gonna be okay." Okay, well, that's where you're at right now. I saw her this week, and she's thriving. She just
Mm.
came in. I'm like, "I don't even really know how I'm gonna put this in my notes because she's doing so well."
It's amazing.
But obviously her grief is still there.
Sure.
It's not gonna go away, but she has grown bigger than her grief.
Yeah.
And of course, she's going to have those grief bursts. And that's what all of us are going to experience. We never know when that grief burst is going to happen, when it's going to hit us. But, I do think we have choices in our grief. We have to choose to want to feel better than we maybe did yesterday. And for some people, that's a hard pill to swallow to kind of think about, like that you can choose that. But sometimes it's just these small little pivots like you talk about, Karen. I love the pivot, right? Like, sometimes we can make just slight changes, and it can make such a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so much of what we're trying to do here as we introduce any of these ideas, because it's so scary when you've had so many changes and so many things that you're needing to do, that the idea of having to do more or to be
Mhm,
figuring all these things out, and even that idea of who am I now? Where do I go from here? Those are like the biggest questions. And if we're trying to
mhm,
answer all of that in one day, we could see how we would be so overwhelmed, and to the point of just not being able to answer any of it or to want to or to do anything about it. We just kind of freeze and retreat, I think, you know?
right.
So we're wanting those small steps and those small pivots, to just kind of ease ourselves into it a little bit. And I think, Kelly, the finding comes in a lot of different forms. There is the finding that we are doing as we are exploring who we are, but there's also those like big questions about the world around us. I mean, this starts to move also into that idea of like purpose and feeling
Mhm,
useful. And, I find a lot of the people that I work with that this time is also spent exploring their religious beliefs or their spirituality. And that can run a whole gamut. I mean, there are people who were born and raised with a set of beliefs and they stick to those beliefs, and that belief helps them through. I think that's the smallest population of people that I work with, frankly. I think it's always wonderful for the people who have that, but more often than not, there's either people who were raised with those beliefs that are now questioning them, people who brought those beliefs into their adulthood and are feeling maybe a little cheated by that and feeling like it didn't quite help them in the way that they expected it to. And there are those who maybe were questioning things before and are certainly questioning things now. What I say to people is that, like in loss, the stakes are higher than they've ever been. We can be really curious about these questions. We can have conversations or study or go to church or whatever it may be to try to answer the what happens, after we die, to answer that question. Where are our loved ones? Am I going to see them again? But it matters so much when you're grieving and when you're thinking about those things. And so I find a lot of people kind of go on this search for something, something to connect to, something to believe in, something to tether themselves to. And that on our best days is a really, overwhelming and really challenging search, I think. I mean, do you
right.
find some of that with the people that you're working with?
Yeah, no, I was talking about something that happened a couple of years ago. It was in my running program, and we brought a breathwork teacher in. And this is a research based program. So we have pre and post tests. And the pre tests ask some questions, right? We ask about spirituality and religion because it does play a factor for a lot of people, right? You can't do grief work without people asking what happens when we die, right?
Sure.
That's, I think, the number one question for our grieving clients a lot of times because they want to know, are their loved ones still with them? And so this person, she did not identify with having any spiritual or religious beliefs at the start of the program. Go through the program, breathwork came. Breathwork is amazing. Actually, I love breathwork, and I hope to have our my breathwork teacher on one of the episodes to talk about it. And I've had after death communications during it, and so this woman, she was very quiet after the session, didn't say much, and then came in the next week, and I said, I need to talk about what I experienced last week. And she had this after death communication during the breath work. Her father came to her very clear as day, all of this. Dad was in the Air Force and was a pilot, and he flew a certain kind of plane. And we walked outside after our breathwork session to go do our running portion of the group, and that specific plane flew right over us
Oh my goodness.
and was not like, we don't live that far from an Air Force base, but they usually go one way. It was going the opposite way.
Hmm,
And she's like, I couldn't even talk about it for days because I was so like overwhelmed by how I felt and how connected I felt to my dad. And like then seeing that plane, like knowing that that was a sign from him.
hmm,
And then you read her post test scores, and spirituality was very different than what she posted for pre.
hmm. Yeah.
And that, like, just blew my mind, right? So it changed her whole perspective of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love to hear when people have an experience like that and they're really eventually able to embrace it and connect it. I
Mhm.
think what happens a lot of times, we have a dream, we have a sign, we have something that happens, and sometimes it almost feels too good to be true. And so we kind of
Mhm.
push back against it. Like, if I want to believe it, then I guess I can't believe it because I just want so badly for there to be
Mhm.
something. So yeah, so this is part of that search. This is part of the finding, that people are trying to do. I know a lot of people are listening to podcasts or reading books, things about near death experience, anything they can kind of get their hands on to give them some reassurance. And,
Yeah.
trying to do all of that again while you're trying to do the day-to-day stuff and be functioning and redoing your routine and everything else, I think can be really hard. So
Yep.
that's, a big part of it. I think another part of it too, kind of moving beyond some of the spiritual stuff, I feel like a lot of times people talk to me about happiness and that they
Mm.
are looking to be happy again. I just want to be happy. And so that also is, I think sort of an interesting goal, and one that I will kindly and lovingly say, we are not making that a goal here,
Mhm.
as we
I'm
are
with
doing.
you.
And it sounds kind of weird to say because I mean, I want everybody to be happy, I
Yep.
mean, but when I really think about happiness and what happiness looks like in our life and how fleeting it is and how unreliable it is, even in the best of times. Think about that wonderful family vacation where everybody's having a great time and then they're arguing an hour later. Like, happiness just doesn't last. It's just very flimsy. It's kind of the fair weathered friend. It's very hard to stake all of our goals on it. So I try to sort of erase that in the idea of what we are working toward as we are working through our grief. So, I like to focus instead on peace. I like to focus on, if there are things that we can find some meaning in, perhaps. And I'm not talking about like those big questions: why are we here? What is my whole purpose with life? People do that on this, but I'm kind of more like, what's getting you out of bed in the morning? And what are the things that are going to feel important to you? And I think if we can feel some sense of peace, contentment, if there's things we feel like we can rely on, things that start to feel a little bit safe and predictable again, that's where happiness follows. Then we can feel happy in the aftermath of the other things that we are making a goal to achieve. So I think that that's important. The other thing I say to people sometimes is that, we have to remember that happiness is sort of like love. And the way you love your pet versus the way you love your favorite food versus the way you love your favorite song, happiness gets reserved for different people. And there may be a happiness that existed very specifically because of this person. And this happiness is not here. So we have to be realistic with what we can actually expect to feel again. Can I feel the same happiness that I had because a person was here when they're no longer here? I don't think I can. So I have to find something else, And there are other types of happiness and other things that I can be feeling, but it's not going to be that. And I guess that's its own thing to mourn as well, and we need to kind of make space for that.
Yeah, I remember this was a very long time ago in a group setting, and a client said, I don't even want to just be I just, everybody talks about happy, and she goes, I don't want to be happy because that's not sustainable.
Mhm.
I just want to be neutral." And
Yeah.
she said, if I'm neutral, I'm peaceful, I'm calm, I'm grounded. And obviously, this is probably 2008. It has stuck with me because it was so powerful. And like, yes,
Yeah.
right? If that's what we could all just aim for, yes. And obviously, we all love to feel joy and happiness, right?
Sure.
That feels good. But sometimes the down, or the opposite, feels really rough as well. And so sometimes the beauty and the magic is in that middle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a sustainability. I mean, that is a big
Hmm.
part of it. And since a grieving person is already feeling this kind of up and down,
Yep.
a very kind of unpredictable, I think people are looking for something that feels more sort of measured and in the middle. And Kelly, I think what connects us and has always connected us with our approach is we really do try to be realistic. And I think kind of these practical approaches, and I always feel unkind when I'm kind of pulling a person back from these bigger goals and dreams, but I think why not like work within the realms of what we can expect to really achieve. We have so much of a better chance of being able to get there, if we start with more of a realistic idea of what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Karen, what difference
Yes.
does it all make?
I love that question.
I know you do.
I'll tell you the first I in my early days of doing this work, and I had a person who was hurting so badly. And we were kind of talking about, here's some things that maybe you could do that could make, the time feel a little bit more tolerable, things like that. And they're kind of like, what difference does it make? And I found myself for a second like, what difference does it make? Kind of having my own like finding spiritual purpose. Like,
Existential crisis.
yes, yes. I mean, it's a hard one to answer, especially if we take it into that realm. So what we and this man, it's so funny you talk about these people that really stick with you when they just present you with this a different approach or question or their own insights. And what we really started to talk about, because I think for him, it was the example of he wanted to go out and play golf, or that's what he had always done. His wife, had since passed. And it was the idea of, sure, I can go out and play golf. I'm going to come home. She's still going to be gone. What difference does it make? Why should I even bother going out and doing these pastimes? They're frivolous. They're ridiculous. What's the point? That's the other question. What's the difference?
Yep.
What's the point?
Yep.
I get that a lot. Um, and so, we had to really kind of break that down. Like, what difference does it make? And what we started to talk about is what I think we've talked about even, through the course of this podcast is being realistic with where our power lies, what we have the ability to change and to not change. I can't go back and undo any events of the past. And I can't change it. I can't fix it. So, what difference does it make is my energy right here today. And we kind of talked about him, like just like you and I right now, the split screen, side by side, the day in the afternoon where he gets to go golfing with some very good friends, be outside, get a little bit of physical activity, and, maybe getting a healthy distraction versus being home, not seeing anybody, not talking to anybody, doing that day after day after day after day, isolating more and more and more. We can see the difference. We can tell what that difference would be in the short term and in the long term. What the difference does it make is, can I make my morning feel more comfortable, safer? I use the word tolerable a lot. Can it just
Yep.
be more tolerable than if I'm not putting my time or effort into these things? And I think that's everything we're hoping to do here with people in the work that they do through grief in action, in the effort and the action that you put into it. And the difference I really believe, and I know you believe it can make, because we've seen the people who do it
Mhm.
and those people that you don't even recognize because they're just doing so well. It's because of the work they're doing.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
a great topic, and I can't wait for us to
I
explore
know.
finding some more in future sessions. There's so many things I want us to talk about, and so many different guests who will be talking about more of these identity questions. We'll be talking more about the continuing bonds. How do you stay connected? How do you keep that relationship with them, and finding just figuring out where do you want to go? What does
Mhm.
life look like now? You're at this like fork in the road. And so what does that look like for you?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
will be lots more to talk about. And we've been asking you for the past few sessions, our podcast episodes, to just kind of notice things, right? Just be aware of things and notice things, maybe journaling about them, jotting them down, and just so, again, we're in the beginning stages of this podcast. So we are just starting to observe. And Karen and I both feel strongly that observation and awareness is kind of that first step in all
Mhm.
of this. So just while we do this, then we're going to give you some more practical tools as we go along and specific goals. But your goals for this week, what we'd like you to kind of notice is, what are the roles and identities that you had before? and what's changed and what feels different and what do you have still have control over and what do you feel like you don't maybe. And what are some small things, some small choices that you're making every day that are maybe helping? And how can you feel, feel more peaceful, more grounded, and rather than just happiness? Like, what are those goals and what does that look like? So, again, this is just about some self discovery, not finding complete answers. We know that this is going to evolve and change. This isn't like, this is my goal, right? And it's going to be this way, and I'm going to be this kind of person. I remember I had a client, he said, I'm going to be this way. It was very early in grief because of the way his fiance was. And I was like, oh, that's great. Like 6 months into the really heavy loneliness, grief, he was like, I can't be that positive person right now. Right? And I was like, yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
surprised. I understand. But getting back to that, right down the road, how do you find your way back to that? So again, we know that this is going to change and evolve. So, any other comments or thoughts about that, Karen?
Well, I guess just reinforcing the importance of observation. It sounds like a very passive goal, but it's something, especially when I just started with a brand new person today. And that's where we start is, we kind of, we're just going along. We're trying to get through the day. We always have tasks in front of us. I don't think we pay attention to ourselves all that much. And so that's kind of what we're asking you to do is to notice yourself, to notice the things that are coming up for you. The finding again is so much of a big question. So we're not wanting you to be labeling things or judging reactions or responses, but where are you finding yourself questioning? Where are you feeling the most lost? I mean, our life has so many different categories, our personal, our professional, our interpersonal with friends and family. Where are we feeling the most disconnected is part of it. And what are the big questions that we find ourselves asking? And maybe even one step beyond observation, could we, for right now, until we can figure some more things out, know that they don't need to be answered today and introduce a little bit of that idea to give ourselves a little bit more time and give ourselves a break.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen.
Oh, thank you,
So,
Kelly.
stay tuned. We've gotten through our first 6 episodes, really talked about our grief and action framework, helping you understand. If this is your first time listening, go back and listen to the other 5 so you understand this framework a little bit better. We're going to be starting with some guests coming up. We will be starting with grounding again. So, we're going back to our G and talking about what that looks like. How do we stay grounded? How do we go back to some of those basics of sleep, nutrition, movement, and super excited for some of our upcoming guests to talk about these things, give you some real practical tools that you can use right away and taking those intentional steps forward as move forward in your grief journey. So
Yeah.
thanks so much for listening. And make sure you subscribe, share this podcast with others who you think may benefit from listening to it. And know that you're not alone in this journey. We're here for you, and we can't wait to be back with you next episode. Take care. Thanks for joining us on The Grief Ladies.
Don't wait to feel better to get started. Getting started is what makes you feel better. Put this week's tool to work.
If today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs it and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, we're here for you, your trusted grief ladies, navigating this path together.